Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the webinar on cooking energy in displacement settings or relevant cooking systems in a word. My name is Ranisha Basnet and I'm working for Energypedia and will be your moderator for today. As you know, this webinar is organized jointly by GIZ in collaboration with UNHCR, NDEF, UNITAR, GPA, MEX, and Clean Cooking Alliance. And the aim of the webinar series is to advocate for sustainable cooking solutions in humanitarian settings using market-based approaches. So as you know, this is a part of our ongoing webinar series where we had our first webinar in July 2021, where we did a webinar on landscaping. We talked about who are the different actors in the sector, what are the different collaboration opportunities that exist. In case you missed our first webinar and would like to get a chance to look at it again, we have shared with you the link to our past recording as well as a current recording in the chat. So you can follow this link and have a look at the recording of the first webinar. We have also put together a one-pager that you can read through it and get to know about what were the key points that we discussed during the first webinar. And similarly, today's webinar, we are going to go deeper into the series and talk more about what are the different cooking energy systems. And finally, we do have a third webinar coming up in November 2021, 9th November precisely, where we are going to talk about the different kinds of delivery models for providing clean cooking solutions, especially in humanitarian displacement settings. So do stay tuned for that one. We will also share an invite to the third webinar in the follow-up email that will go out. So we hope that you'll also join us for the third one. And this webinar will be recorded. So we will share with you the recording of this webinar and any other outputs that we might create. So moving forward, let's go through a little bit of housekeeping rules. Today, as you all might know, is a very special webinar because unlike a traditional webinar, in the first part, we are going to have presentations. But in the second part, we are going to go into breakout rooms where you will discuss with each of your presenter and moderator on specific topics. So that means during the breakout rooms, you will have a chance to raise questions and interact directly with your speaker. Saying that, we do want to also encourage you to use the chat function, or in this case, the question tab on your screen, if you have any questions that you want to ask during the webinar duration. It could be questions about sound system, technical questions, or any other questions. So just use the the question box on your left side of your screen. In case you don't see a question box, then there should be like an orange icon, like an arrow icon. When you click on it, a box will expand, and there you have a section called questions. And there you should also see a welcome message from us. So please do use this question box to share with us any questions that you might have during the webinar duration. And in case you are using a tablet or a mobile phone, it will look a bit different for you because you are logging via an app. So there, try to look for this question icon where you can then click on this icon and a pop-up will appear and you can send in your questions, as well as you'll see the greeting from us, the message that we send. So let's have a quick look at today's agenda. Today we have a lot on the agenda. So we are going to kickstart with the first presentation from Krista Roth, who is a food and fuel consultant, and she's going to talk about the user-centric cooking system design, why we need to talk about it. And then we'll have short pitch on key and relevant cooking energy systems from 6 speakers who are going to try to convince you why they think the fuel that they have chosen is the best. And after those 6 short presentations, you then have an opportunity to choose the technology that you really find interesting and would like to dive deeper. And then we'll go into the breakout rooms where your presenter will be waiting for you, and you can then directly interact with them, ask questions, and have follow-up discussions. And finally, we will have a key takeaways where each of the moderator from those breakout rooms will share what are the key things that they would like the audience to take home with. So without further ado, let's kickstart this webinar with the first poll question. So right now on your screen, I'm going to launch a poll, and you should have one poll question that is popping up. And the question is, what is the most important factor in selecting clean cooking solutions? So whether it is applicability, if it applies to a particular setting or not, affordability, availability, health and safety, environmental. So please choose the option that you think is the best in your point of view. You can also choose multiple options in case you think more than one criteria applies. So let's give it a few more seconds so that all our participants can respond. And as I said, you are allowed to choose multiple options. So let's give it another 20 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds. So last chance to vote, and now I'll close the poll shortly. So if you haven't voted, this is the last chance, and now I'll close the poll and show the results. So as you can see on your screen, a majority of our participants today think affordability followed by applicability and health and safety are the key criteria, and the last comes environmental efficiency. So thank you so much. And now I would like to stop sharing. Sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see it. I think now you are seeing the results. So now you can see on your screen that affordability and applicability was the top two ones. And now I'll close the results. And now that you can see my screen again, so we are now diving deeper into the presentation with our first presenter for today, Krista Roth. So we have a pre-recorded presentation from Krista where she's going to talk about why is it that we need to talk about user-centric approach. So I'm going to shortly play the video. Since it's a pre-recorded presentation, you might have to turn up the volume a little bit up and down. So please adjust the volume accordingly. And now I'm going to play the presentation, and it should be on your screen shortly. And please allow it a few minutes for it to appear.
Good afternoon. I'm Krista Ross. Welcome to this introduction on what's cooking. Mastering fire to cook food is at the core of human survival. Cooking energy to prepare vital food can be over 80% of the total energy used in a household. A cook stove typically needs over 100 times more energy than a light bulb. Not cooking is not an option, but cooking is a complex affair. It starts with food inputs and a pot or other vessel, which in displacement settings is often provided by the agencies. Then it needs fuel, which could be, for example, electricity, LPG, or ethanol, but these are rarely available in the camps or provided by the agencies, so that the refugees often need to go out of the camps to collect firewood from their surroundings. The type of fuel determines the stove that is appropriate to burn the available fuel. Users may prefer certain fuels for convenience or taste, for example, roasting food over burning embers. So one fuel type is not sufficient. The parallel use of more than one fuel and stove is called stacking. Everybody stacks. We all use different fuels in our lives and have more than one stove to suit each fuel. As an example, we have a multitude of electric cooking appliances, often designed for very specific uses. The user decides not only on the fuel and stove, but also how, when, and where to cook. If there is smoke from a fire, the choice of location where to cook will determine how much smoke from this fire can actually reach the cook. The ventilation and the behavior of the cook will determine how much of that smoke will actually be breathed into its lungs. Cooking outdoors reduces the negative consequences for human health considerably. A stove that is not suitable or not liked will not be used. A stove that is not used will not have any impact on fuel savings or yield any of the other benefits for which the stove got selected in the first place. So we need to shift the focus from the stove to the user. And there's no one size fits all solution in cooking, but any approach to find a cooking solution should start with the user. This is an example from a cookout in a camp in Gambela, Ethiopia, during a user-centered design exercise from April this year. It was very interesting to see that both improved stove models that are commonly distributed by organizations in the camps were abandoned in the process of cooking. Instead, the users made a beeline to finish the cooking on other firewood clay stoves, which give out more heat and allow them to cook faster. But there was no suitable clay stove for them to use in the camp or purchase. So together we went through the checklist, starting with the fuels. What is available, accessible, and affordable? Who needs to cook what, when and how? Where do they like to cook? Which type of pots or vessels do they like? Which size and type of operations do they use? The exercise confirmed the observed preference for a locally made clay stove, so together with local potters and the users, we started designing their dream stove. This result you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, and we estimated the potential impact of an assumed equivalent value of $50,000 invested into stoves. That could be either 2,500 stoves of the improved type at $20 that can save theoretically up to 50% of the fuel, or it could be 25,000 of the locally produced clay stoves at $2 each that resulted from the user-centered design process. So we estimate the potential fuel savings to reach at least 30%, but it needs to be confirmed as it is a new model. If we extrapolate different scenarios of adoption that we observed in the camps, we had a conservative estimate of 10% of the stove owners of the improved type using their stove. If we assume that, we can at best save 6 donkey carts per day of firewood. Yet it's more realistic to assume that only 1% of the users or stove owners actually use their stove. For the locally produced stove, a very different pattern emerges. So far, over 80% of the stoves that people got seem to be used, and if it were only 50%, this less performing stove could still save 30 times more firewood than the so-called improved stove that is not liked and used much. What does that mean? Impact is a multiplication of performance, adoption, and scale. If one of these factors is low, the overall result will be low. That means that impact will be low. So we conclude, in order to maximize impact, adoption is key. The user, the conditions, the food, etc., and continuous fuel availability need to be key elements to be considered when designing cooking energy implementation. Adoption and scale can matter more than performance. A less performing stove that people like and use can save much more firewood than a better stove. Users' preferences are at the core of impact. We should listen to them. Thanks for listening to me. Thank you for your attention.
So you might want to lower your volume a little bit low if you turn it high. And now we are back on the webinar. So thank you, Krista, for that presentation. And like she mentioned, users are the center of any interventions. And thank you so much for rightly pointing that out. And moving forward, let's have another poll to get to know you, the audience, a better. So I'm going to put up another poll questions on your screen. So you should have a question on the screen that says, where do you see the future of clean cooking solutions? Is it more firewood, biogas, ethanol, LPG, eCooking? So as usual, you can select more than one options. So please do tell us, where do you think the future of clean cooking is going? And I can see a lot of votes are coming in. So let's leave it for another 30 seconds so that all of our users can vote. And let's leave it for another 10 seconds. As I can see, the votes are still coming in. And as I mentioned, multiple choice, so you can also vote for more than one options. So now I will close the poll. So if you haven't voted, please do so. And I'll shortly close the poll and display the results. So now you should see the poll results. So most of our audience say the future of cooking is going to be e-cooking, and followed by firewood or processed biomass and biogas. Processed biomass. Then there was LPG and biogas. Thank you so much to all of you for voting. We actually have a presentation on all those topics lined up. So where our speakers will try to convince you again why they think the particular fuel is better or has more advantage. So without further ado, I am going to play the presentations from our speakers for where they are going to talk about, sorry, I will just first hide the results. So I'm going to now pull up our pre-recorded presentations where our speakers are going to talk about or briefly introduce the 6 cooking technologies, that is the firewood, processed biomass, LPG, e-cooking, biogas, and ethanol, what you just voted on right now. Again, this is going to be pre-recorded presentation, so you might have to turn up the volume a little bit up in case the voice is very soft. So I'm just gonna now pull up the presentation and it should start in your screen like shortly.
Um, Hello everyone, my name is Neha Juneja and I'm one of the co-founders of Greenway. We are an improved biomass stoves manufacturer based out of India, having sales in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa but predominantly in India. We manufacture a range of clean burning stoves that use all kinds of biomass ranging from firewood to dry cow dung to crop residue, so on and so forth. And over the years, we've sold about 1.2 million stoves, mostly through partnerships with community based organizations, through consumer finance, and of course, through lots of women's groups and so. I will talk a little bit more broadly about what biomass cook stoves are and where they stand in the whole value chain of clean cooking over the next slide. Um, as you can see, it's biomass-based cook stoves admittedly are not the cleanest or the healthiest solution that one can have for the problem of unclean cooking. But they definitely do form a very pragmatic first steps towards changing how much of the world cooks, changing how bad it is, how much of the world cooks. In terms of health or indoor air pollution, they do offer a slight improvement in indoor air pollution, which is measurable and can be sensed by consumers as well. However, the reduction in particulate matter emissions or even CO emissions would not match what a healthy level might be. So it's an improvement, but it's definitely not ideal when it comes to indoor air pollution. You can use, they offer flexibility in terms of a variety of biomass that can be used without processing, without habit change, without any change in the size of fuel that you collect or the combination of fuel that you collect. Absolutely no changes are needed in most cases. Fuel consumption in terms of how much fuel is used by improved biomass cook stoves. Consumption can actually go down drastically to as much as 70%. I'm meaning that you use only 30% of what you were using earlier. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, each stove used by a family over 1 year and every improved biomass stove can reduce between 1 to 3 tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year, which is very significant and definitely something that makes is now with the carbon markets is also making this more viable. The models we produce are tier 3 and tier 2 on the ISO scale. And of course, our models are, and most models that you see in this space are generally portable, long lasting designs. The number one benefit that consumers state after buying and using a stove over a period of time, an improved biomass stove, is that it saves time. Women like it because it saves them time when it comes to fuel collection, and women like it because it saves them time. I use the term women because, at least in the context that we work in, not many men cook, hence I'm using the correct gender, the dominant gender, to describe this activity. But cooks like it because it kindles faster, cuts down on the amount of time we need to spend in the kitchen, on the stove, so on and so forth. The fuel is always readily and generally freely available. We've seen that in sub-Saharan Africa and India, and I want to qualify this that most of our sales are wood burning or general biomass burning cook stoves and not charcoal based stoves, which means that generally firewood, dry dung, crop waste is used, which is pretty much easily and freely available through the year. However, we do see that families tend to pre-stock cooking fuel to avoid very hot summers, going out in very hot summers, and also to avoid monsoons where most of what you would collect would be wet. Most improved biomass stoves, including ours, are under $40. This is the retail price with no spend on fuel. And even yet, the biggest challenge that we see in terms of adoption is the fact that people are simply not able to purchase in spite of the fact that it's $40, and $40 does not seem like very much. And I want to quickly qualify that why is a stove that's so cheap yet seemingly affordable, but yet unaffordable, yet it is unaffordable. And the reason for that is that most of the target households for this kind of a product earn under one or at best $2 a day. And there are just a lot of competing purchases for the amount of money that they have. If a family has saved $10 or $15, they might want to keep that for a whole range of different things, whether it's a new smartphone, whether it's a smartphone, whether it's a phone recharge, whether it's television connectivity or a bicycle, whatever it might be. There's just so many competing uses of that same source of money. And since cooking happens to be a gendered activity, cooking typically tends to go to the bottom of the priority pile when it comes to spending money. So, which is why even though prices, one can easily crash the prices of improved stoves with more mass manufacturing, better, more efficient distribution, so on and so forth. Yet there needs to be a lot of bottom-up awareness and sort of urgency of need in order to actually get people to spend their money on clean cooking. Moving forward, um, in the context of our conference, I will I will be available to answer questions on why I think, at least, that biomass burning cook stoves or improved biomass cook stoves form one of the most pragmatic solutions in the context of displacements. I have some pictures of internal displacement or seasonal displacement, as we call it within India, where people living near the Brahmaputra or the Yangtze River, which comes to India from China, typically have to move homes to previously unknown locations. Like every time it's generally a new location because their villages are completely flooded for about 3 months in the year. The flooding that you see in these pictures is before people have moved. So they're still in their actual homes where they've started using a greenway stove, our smaller model. They've started using the stove because generally their mud stove is typically a little bit further outside the house, and both the stoves, you don't see it in this picture, are actually submerged at this very moment. And there are many such scenarios where people have to move temporarily, or people sometimes have to move more permanently where they need. And cooking is something that you need to do every day, multiple times a day. It does not really matter what kind of a setting you're in. And it is in this context that as long as people have access to fuel, which people do in case of displacements like these, a biomass burning cook stove that the family owns as its own can be uh, moved with them and used with a reasonable level of ease, and of course at a much, much lower cost than what many of the other solutions might cost. I will stop here, and I will look forward to discussing more in person with everybody, online but in one-on-one. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Matthew Owen. I'm an independent bioenergy specialist. I'm based in the UK. I've been asked to kick off the presentations beginning with 2 slides on processed biomass, which is defined as charcoal, pellets, and various types of briquettes. So starting with charcoal, charcoal is usually made from wood, and through a process of carbonization, which is essentially burning with limited supply of oxygen, you can turn this into charcoal, which is a high carbon solid wood fuel. If you take the charcoal, there's usually quite a lot of dust and residues left over, either at the production site or during transportation or at wholesaling sites. And these fines and dust are too small to be marketable, but you can densify those residues, add a binder, usually starch-based, and put them through some sort of extruder or press and produce char briquettes. The pictures here show pillar-shaped char briquettes, hexagonal, you can get cylindrical or spherical, made through a process called agglomeration. You can get the same types of briquette using agricultural processing residues or field residues or wood processing residues like sawdust through a slightly different route. You dry those residues if they're not already dry. Again, you carbonize them, and again, you densify them, and you can also get char briquettes. Going down another route from agri-processing residues, you can dry and densify and get a couple of other products. One is fuel pellets, very small in size. The other is biomass briquettes, generally a little larger, often 70 to 90 millimeters in diameter, either hexagonal or cylindrical, made through extrusion or using ram presses. And you can carbonize those briquettes and get what I'm calling charcoal briquettes. This is a higher grade product than a regular char briquette and more closely parallels regular wood charcoal in terms of its ash content and calorific value. So in terms of a kind of gradation of quality, you probably start with the biomass briquette, which in terms of calorific value is similar to very dry firewood. Pellets are higher grade, kind of raw biomass fuel. They're higher grade because they can be burned in gasifier stoves, which are almost entirely clean burning. Slightly higher grade again in terms of calorific content will be the char briquettes, and highest of all will be the charcoal and the charcoal briquettes. Moving on to the second slide to look at the characteristics of the fuel and various considerations for users. Looking first at health and safety issues, charcoal and char briquettes and charcoal briquettes char and charcoal briquettes emit mainly carbon monoxide, which is typical of all hydrocarbon fuels. The main way around that is to have the best possible efficiency in combustion and to ensure you're cooking in a well ventilated space, ideally with the windows open or a through draft. There is also in the biomass briquettes, the non-carbonized fuels, a risk of other pollutants coming off, smoke and particulate matter, and pellets tend to be very clean burning due to the gasification of the wood gas, the combustion of the wood gas that comes off at high temperature. So that's most clean burning of all. Other risks associated with the fuels are minimal, at least compared with other fuels. The usual risks of spillage or a pot falling off, but it wouldn't be unique to these processed biomass fuels. And there aren't really any kind of user risks in terms of procurement and collection. These are commercially traded fuels. You buy them or you don't buy them. You don't have to go out looking for them in the bush or anything like that. In terms of their environmental impacts, well, briquettes and pellets are usually made from residues. There's no major environmental impact. In fact, there's a benefit from recycling these wastes and byproducts. The environmental impacts of charcoal are more debatable. Some say they're strongly associated with deforestation. I would tend to say they're more likely to be associated with a process of forest degradation, and that deforestation, which is a permanent change in land cover, would be more likely to be linked to expansion of agriculture, livestock or urban areas. So charcoal production might be part of a process that eventually ends up in deforestation, but is more likely to be about degradation. There's a high efficiency potential from most of these fuels if burned in the right types of stoves. Biomass briquettes, however, are a little bit harder. They need a large firebox, good ventilation, and that tends to be difficult to achieve in a small domestic stove. Pellets are the most efficient of all and often used in these gasifiers, often with forced air, highest efficiency of all. In terms of user considerations, affordability, and access, char briquettes have quite a few issues associated with them, which impair uptake. They're often quite fragile. They have a high breakage rate when you're throwing them often on lorries and delivering them to customers, often resulting in a lot of dust in the bottom of the sacks. They often take longer to light than regular wood fuels, whether that be firewood or charcoal, and that needs special techniques, and not all users are willing or able to use those new techniques. They tend to be slower to heat up and have a lower peak temperature. Often charcoal briquettes are not very good for grilling foods either, and cannot be extinguished and reused. Only charcoal, of the fuels I'm talking about here, can actually be put out with water and used again another day, and that's a big user drawback of many of these processed fuels. In terms of their availability, well, charcoal's ubiquitous. It's available anywhere, anytime, on any street corner. Sourcing briquettes and pellets can be a lot harder, especially in rural areas, and there are a limited number of producers of these fuels, and they often don't have large distribution networks, especially down to retail level. And there may be seasonal supply constraints if you're relying for your raw material on agricultural processing residues. And finally, in terms of cost, char briquettes, because they're often made of salvaged charcoal residues, often from urban wholesaling sites, can be potentially produced more cheaply per tonne than regular charcoal, though that will depend whether you can get them out to customers that way, and it may be you have to sell business to business to avoid the cost markups that you might see through distribution networks. The other fuels do tend to be more expensive because of the process of aggregation, often carbonization, transport from rural areas to urban areas to sell them, and they tend not to be price competitive with existing wood fuels, and that can be a difficulty and might require subsidy, at least at the beginning. And those higher prices are often not recouped by savings on the part of the customer, so it might not be an attractive economic proposition, and it can be difficult to achieve conversion to these fuels. Hope we have more time to discuss this. My time is up. Thanks very much.
My name is Hanan Marwa from Circle Gas, a pay-as-you-go LPG distributor with activities in Kenya, Tanzania, and China. Today I'm presenting on LPG more generally, which is a clean cooking fuel used by billions of people around the world. Relative to other cooking fuels, LPG is better for the environment, better for users' health, generally affordable, widely available, and convenient to use. Household air pollution from smoke-induced coal and biomass results in 1 death every 16 seconds, mostly women and young children. LPG is the only stove whose emissions are below the critical level of 10 parts per cubic meter. In contrast to LPG, biomass typically releases 19 times more emissions per meal. Improper use of LPG can cause injuries from burns and even explosions from factors including poorly maintained equipment and unsafe filling. Training users to safely use and store LPG is essential, as is proper regulation of equipment and storage facilities. LPG is a clean burning fuel that produces fewer CO2 emissions compared to biomass, fuel oil, and in many countries, electricity. LPG emits virtually no particulates, thus switching to LPG has an impact on levels of black carbon, microscopic airborne particles, which some experts rank as the second biggest contributor to climate change after CO2. LPG has a strong global supply chain and is a primary cooking fuel for many in the developed and developing world. LPG is very convenient. It can be turned on and off at will, making cooking quicker and more efficient compared to other fuels. Where available, it can be purchased at retail points, which are more likely to be in urban areas. Not all countries have the infrastructure to import and distribute LPG easily and efficiently. In many places which do have the infrastructure to access LPG, including Kenya and Tanzania, cooking with LPG is cheaper than using charcoal and kerosene, though the upfront cost of buying a full cylinder and stove is prohibitive for many families. At Circle Gas, we provide this equipment in order to lower the barrier to entry for low-income families. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. John Leary. I'm a senior researcher with the Modern Energy Cooking Services, or MEX program. I imagine that many of you, when you're thinking about electric cooking, may be thinking about an oven with 4 hot plates on top, something that uses over 4 kilowatts of power and costs several hundreds of dollars. Well, this may be an appropriate solution for wealthy, grid-connected households with a stable supply of electricity. However, it's important to be aware of the range of new technologies and business models which are opening up electric cooking for lower income households with unreliable grid connections or living in completely off-grid areas. This is due to the recent fall in the price of solar PV and battery storage, as well as the availability of modern energy-efficient appliances. For example, the electric pressure cooker, which often retails for between $60 and $100 and uses less than 1 kilowatt of power, can greatly reduce the amount of electricity required to cook, as illustrated by Kenya Power's recent tweet showing that cooking heavy foods like beans with an electric pressure cooker can be many times cheaper than other popular options available in Nairobi today. So in terms of health, electric cooking has 0 emissions in the kitchen itself. Insulated appliances such as rice cookers can mitigate the risk of burns, and pressure cooking itself has inherent safety challenges, but EPCs have many automated safety and control mechanisms that can ensure that the pot can't be opened when it's pressurized. There's also no need to leave the house with electric cooking to either collect fuel or to purchase refills. The environmental impact of electric cooking depends on the generation mix and battery storage technology. However, for example, here in Kenya, then the majority of electricity is already generated from renewable sources, with over 70% of grid electricity generated by hydro, geothermal and other renewables. Electric cooking is a tier 5 solution that can offer up to 90% thermal efficiency, but the biggest energy savings can actually be made through insulation, stopping heat escaping from the pot, pressurization, accelerating the cooking process, and automatic control, turning off the heating element once you've got to the desired temperature. These savings can offer much greater reductions in the amount of energy required for cooking than marginal increases in the thermal efficiency. Electric cooking is very convenient. You don't need to collect fuel, prepare the stove in advance, and the automatic controls can enable cooks to multitask. The reductions in boiling time are particularly important for cultures where heavy foods such as beans and tripe that conventionally require boiling for several hours are commonly cooked. In terms of availability, well, those of us that are lucky enough to have a reliable grid connection can cook with electricity 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. However, if your connection is unreliable, then blackouts and brownouts can severely limit your ability to cook with electricity. However, energy storage can now mitigate many of these concerns. In off-grid regions, then solar home systems offer the most power on sunny days, but the much lower cost of solar panels in recent years means that solar home systems for cooking can now be designed to deliver sufficient power even in the rainy season on cloudy days, with excess power then available in the dry season. In terms of affordability, it's tempting to go for inefficient appliances, which have a moderate upfront cost. However, the running costs are much higher due to their increased electricity consumption. We're now very much focused on modern, energy-efficient appliances, such as the electric pressure cooker, which have a higher upfront cost, but a lower running cost. These efficient devices often need to be paired with service-based delivery models, which can break down that high upfront cost into manageable installments, which are on a par with what people are currently paying for cooking fuels. So to conclude, electric cooking is now a much more equitable technology, which means that it's worth considering in displacement settings. To find out more, please check out our website, where you can find out about the usability testing we did for the Global Leap Awards for electric pressure cookers with cooks here in Nairobi. ATEX pay-as-you-go enabled induction stove, which is available on the market in Cambodia, and SCODE's solar electric cooking pilot, which enabled off-grid households to use electric pressure cookers as part of a clean fuel stack with LPG. So thanks for listening. I look forward to engaging in the discussion.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for signing in to this webinar. My name is Esther. I'm the Managing Director East Africa for Sistema Bio, and I am speaking to you from Nairobi. Today, I'm really excited to tell you a little bit more about Sistema Bio and specifically about biogas, which is the clean and renewable cooking solution. Very particularly, I'd like to highlight a few of the most important aspects of biogas and particularly of our Sistema Bio product and cook stove. Related to health and safety, what is really exciting about biogas is that it literally has zero indoor air pollution. It is clean and renewable energy. There's a very low risk of indoor toxicity. As you might know, biogas contains some H2S, but at Sistema Bio we have a filter and ventilation that prevents this H2S from reaching the person that is cooking. From an environmental perspective, biogas is also a very multidimensional clean cooking fuel. It contributes directly to reducing deforestation and therefore directly helps support SDG 15. It reduces poor waste management and protects water bodies, which is in SDG 14. Very importantly, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, not only by replacing fossil fuels and biomass through clean and renewable energy, but also by treating the animal waste, which would otherwise convert into methane and emit methane. So the biodigester is actually eliminating and transforming this methane into CO2. And it's important to note that methane contributes to greenhouse gases 84 times as much as CO2. And finally, in terms of environment, the biogas and our product, the biodigester, increases access to clean energy in rural areas. In terms of efficiency, our cook stove has been tested through an ISO certified methodology and has ranked in the top tier rating in terms of reduction of particulate matter, as well as its efficiency, durability, and safety. If we try to compare biogas with firewood, we can really note that 1 cubic meter of biogas is the equivalent to 1.3 kilos of firewood, which is the equivalent of roughly 1.5 hours of continuous cooking on our cook stove. So it really has a tremendous impact on firewood consumption. Finally, beyond using biogas for clean cooking, there are many other appliances that Sistema Bio developed to optimize biogas, from industrial burners to engines or other farm equipment. In terms of affordability, availability, and convenience, really biogas is extremely easy to use. There's no need to collect or to buy any source of fuel outside of the homestead. All the energy you need is produced on site by the biodigester. So this really increases the resilience of our clients who don't need to go outside and depend on other sources of fuels. There's no need for any cook stove preparation. You just need to switch it off and cook. And the digester maintenance is very basic. In terms of biogas availability, this is really ideal for rural homes which have livestock, so that you can transform the animal waste into biogas, but we can also treat other types of waste such as food waste or in cases of sanitation, human waste. Biogas is available 24/7 as long as the biodigester is being fed regularly with manure or other types of waste. And it is ideal for temperate and warm climates with water availability. In terms of affordability, this is a key focus area for us. When in Kenya, our clients pay a 10% deposit and start saving money from day one. This is really important for us. So we have a financing plan of up to 24 months, and our clients actually spend less on their loan than they do than they used to spend on charcoal and firewood. So from day one, our clients are saving money, and we're able to basically replace most or all of cooking fuels in the household, which usually represent up to 35% of the expenses in the household. I look forward to seeing you in the breakout room. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Technologies and Fuels breakout session. My name is Desaleng Getana from Gaia Clean Energy Ethiopia and presenting the ethanol stove and fuels technology, focusing on the impact. Ethanol stoves and fuels technology impact. Ethanol cookstoves significantly reduce household air pollution and provide a number of health benefits. If you compare it with freestone, it is 400 times cleaner in terms of particulate matter and emits 13 times less carbon monoxide. The other excellent features of the stove is its safety. The stoves are very safe, with an astonishing safety record in the refugee camps for over 15 years. The safety of the stoves centers on the fuel canister, which is non-pressurized and spill-proof. The stove have refillable adsorbative fuel canister that keeps the fuel safely inside. When opened with a slide regulator, the fuel evaporates into the combustion chimney and burns as a gas. The other added safety benefit is ethanol is miscible in and easily extinguishable by water. Other safety aspects that needs to be considered are fuel handling and storage and ethanol denaturing. The ethanol fuel should be stored and handled safely by applying all liquid fuel storage precautions. The fuel should also be properly denatured to make it unfit for human consumption. Most of the time, colorant, odorizing, and bittering agents are used to denature the ethanol fuel. Generally, ethanol have a very positive impact on the environment by reducing the need for firewood and charcoal, and also reduces green gas emission. The ethanol fuel is also non-toxic and biodegradable. If spilled, it can quickly break into harmless substances. Most ethanol stoves that have available in the market has a thermal efficiency of 60+% and have heat power around 1.75 kilowatt, which delivers ample heat to the pot and cook fast. In all stove test metrics, the stove achieved Tier 4, and there is no added on needed to improve the efficiency of the stove. One other feature most likely liked by ethanol stove users is convenience. The stoves are very safe and easy to operate and use. It turns on immediately with no time or struggle to ignite. The flame can also be regulated easily. For instance, a liter of ethanol provides 4 hours of cooking on the maximum power setting and 7 hours with the lower setting. The stove and fuel availability. Ethanol fuel is produced and available locally in most East African countries, usually as part of their domestic sugar industry, with a high growing potential. Currently, most East African countries are expanding their sugar industries to self-sustain themselves with sugar. Ethanol is an ideal solution for many East African countries that have no or little petroleum natural gas resources. Ethanol can also be produced on large, small, or very small scale, and it has very convenient and efficient supply chain over other fuels. Seasonal variation have little impact on ethanol, as ethanol can be stored during distillery's maintenance time. Ethanol stove and fuel affordability. The different types and design of the stoves are to meet the different needs of the users. The stoves are available from the price of 23 USD, but different mechanisms such as local assembly and subsidy from carbon finance can be applied to reduce the cost of the stove. Considering the lifespan of 5 to 10 years, the stove price is not actually expensive. When you come to the fuel, in most markets, especially in urban centers, the ethanol fuel price competes with the price of charcoal, kerosene, and LPG. For example, the price in Ethiopia is cheaper compared to kerosene and LPG, but expensive than wood and electricity, as the electricity tariff is still one of the cheapest. Thank you for listening.
In case you turn up your volume, so maybe you want to turn it a bit down so that it's not too loud for you. Thank you so much. And first of all, a huge thank you to all our 6 presenters for presenting the technology and especially showing us how each of the technologies stands on the 6 indicator matrix. That's basic affordability, applicability, availability, health and safety, and environmental standards. I hope that has been really useful for all of you, and now you are quite, you know, which groups you like to go in and join and discuss. I can also see a lot of chat questions, so please hold on to those questions, because as we go to the groups, you can then ask those questions directly in the groups or in the technology that you are interested in it. So now let me quickly switch. Yes. Now we come to the fun part where we will then dive deeper with all the amazing 6 presenters and then talk in detail about why the particular technology that they mentioned is good, or what other arguments you would like to make for it, or what other points you would like to discuss with them. So before we go into the breakout rooms, we wanted to give a bit of technical details so that it's easy for you to switch to the other platform, which I already see some of you have already been trying. So what we are doing is for the breakout rooms, there is a link that my colleague will share like in a few minutes from now. She also already shared in the first chat message. When you open that link, in your browser, whether you use a Google, Firefox, or whatever browser you use, a link will pop up, and then that's the breakout room. So once that link pops in, the first thing you'll see is this option which says, how would you like to join the audio? So please choose a microphone, because then you can talk to us, we can hear you. That's very important, because then it's easy for you to ask your questions during the breakout rooms. And then the second pop-up will come that is called eco test. Please do this eco test and click on the green yes, because otherwise sometimes the system does not automatically take your audio into consideration. And as you can already see on the breakout room, some of my panelists, they have already joined in, and we are also waiting to make the switch. And then the third option to take into account is, in case your audio is still not working, maybe go to your browser and see if you have allowed your browser to use the microphone or not. That could also be one of the reasons. So please do take care of these 2 factors. And then the second thing is, so once we all have joined in the room, I will be sending out a request to join particular rooms. And then when I do that, at first it look like everything is gray, but that's because the link is being generated for each room. And once the link is generated, it will become like the join room becomes blue. That's here where you can see my cursor, so where the join room is, and then just click on that, and then you should be able to join the room without any problem. So finally, so my colleague is now going to share the link, so please click on those links. I see a lot of people have already switched to the other ones, so I'm going to shortly greet you on the breakout rooms. For everyone else, these are the different topics, so please have a look, and I'll meet you shortly on the other breakout rooms.